Every day, in a tweet or a post or an email, I get asked to get good and mad at someone. The president, members of Congress, voters who don't vote the way I do. You know what I'm talking about, right? Breakfast and a hot cup of rage. Women, though, women are particularly angry. They're angry at men. And you know why? Because of guys like Harvey and Matt and Brett. And because just about every woman who's ever set foot in the workplace has at some point in her career been sexually harassed or assaulted by a male coworker. Anybody here have a Me Too story? It's a big club. It's a powerful club if you count the heads that have rolled. And I, as a woman, I have a standing invitation to join it. But I'm not going to. Not because I don't have a Me Too story, but because I do. Stay with me here. When I was 24 and out of a job, I called up a former boss and asked if he could help. He invited me to dinner. I showed up expecting a job offer. He showed up expecting sex. I didn't get what I came for. He did. Now here's an important part of the story I've left out. I called this guy because I knew he was attracted to me. From the day I'd gone to work for him, I could see that what he saw in me was my sex and nothing but my sex. I should have protested. I had other attributes worth admiring. But since my sexuality was the only power of mine that this powerful man validated, that was the card I decided to play. I lost that game. Big time. For months, I burned with anger. At him for using me, and at myself for letting him. But then, from the ashes of this humiliation, something bright and steely emerged. I realized that how others saw me was largely up to me. I could affirm the sexual self men saw in me, or I could dim the tractor beam and assert the attributes I wanted them to see until that's all they saw. I decided how I'd be treated at work because I decided how I'd show up. Now, is our sex the first thing people see in us? Yeah. It's the first thing I see in other people. How about you? Yeah, because we're wired, all of us, to sniff out sexual competition and sexual opportunity. But I think we can agree that with our coworkers, it's important we rise above these reflexes because they're disruptive, because they're potentially destructive, and because most of us have way more to offer. Some of us, some of our coworkers, to be sure, can't seem to control themselves. Some men, on account of their seniority, feel entitled to indulge their sexual urges at work. But a recent national study suggests that most men in positions of power are not only controlling their urges, they're effectively gender blind in their job interactions with women. Let's look at that data. What you're seeing here is a heat map of bias in the white-collar workplace that was published last year by the Center for Talent Innovation. We call it a heat map because the data is color-coded to show you which groups, women, LGBT professionals, people of color, feel like their bosses are biased against them in these qualities, like their ability, their ambition, their commitment, their emotional intelligence. The redder the box, the more likely that group is to perceive bias in their bosses, most of whom are white men. So, who do you see there with the most color that feels most discriminated against? People born outside the US and people with disabilities. And who do you see is least likely to perceive bias in their bosses? White people and women. Now, we can't infer from this data that women aren't discriminated against. The data shows only that they are less likely than men and other groups to perceive negative bias in their bosses' evaluation of these 6 things. But it's kind of shocking, right? And why is that? Because the data doesn't tell the story that we're so vested in right now as women. The Me Too story of our victimization, we derive a lot of solidarity from telling it. But how can we expect men to see us as equals if we continue to portray ourselves as victims? I propose a different strategy. That we not bring our full selves to work. That we leave, all of us, our gender differences at the door. I'm proposing that we show up at work the way we show up in our resumes, leading with our value add, asserting our experience, and flaunting our expertise. We leave the revealing clothing and the sexual signaling for non-work interactions. We don't send mixed messages. Because over time, this approach to getting noticed works. Just ask Donna Strickland, who won the Nobel Prize in Physics, or Shonda Rhimes, the genius behind hits like Scandal and Grey's Anatomy, or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, whom we just elected to the New York House of Representatives. These women are where they are today because of their ideas and their grit. And because by downplaying their sex, they made it safe for men to be their allies and their advocates. I can't think of a better reason for us women to leave our sex at the door, because it gets in the way of us winning sponsorship. Sponsors, as economist Sylvia Hewlett defines them, are leaders who extend a hand down to pull you up Nobody gets to the top without them. And because right now most leaders are men, it's men whose backing and trust we need to earn. Now, if we choose instead to leverage the considerable power of our gender, that is absolutely our choice to make. But if we make that choice, let us cop to our responsibility for the consequences. Because to insist otherwise, to insist that we women have no accountability for how we are seen and treated, is to insist, by extension, that on account of our gender, we have no agency. That because we are women, we are powerless to determine our fates. I reject that. We decide, you and I, how we show up. Let us not give that power away. Thank you.